Welcome to our session. First of all, I would like to thank the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change for giving this opportunity to address you today. As we move further from the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, climate-related natural disasters are intensifying globally. We have notable advancement, but it's clear that our time is significantly limited. This Conference of Parties presents a pivotal moment to drive global action forward. And now I think it's time to outline the roadmaps for these pledges and to explore strategies for financing the efforts. COP29 has come to be known as the Finance COP, as you may know. And before starting and introducing our esteemed panelists, allow me to introduce myself and our association and explain why we are organizing this session today. I'm Armağan Vurdu. Since 1996, I have undertaken various roles in the Ministry of Foreign Trade and Ministry of Economy and the İMMİB Exporters Association. I've served as Commercial Counselor at the London Embassy of Turkey, Chief of Staff of the Trade Minister, Deputy Director General for the European Union, General Director of Turkish Free Zones, and I currently serve as the General Secretary of İMMİB, Istanbul Mineral and Metals Exporters Association. Our primary mission is to promote exports of our member companies. We represent almost 73,000 member companies in 6 different sectors, namely steel, ferrous and non-ferrous metals, minerals and mining, chemicals and chemical products, electrical and electronics, and jewelry. These sectors constitute around 40% of Turkey's total exports. And the steel sector, the steel industry, remain fundamental to global development, underpinning critical sectors such as automotive and construction. However, the industry also faces pressing environmental challenges, particularly due to its high carbon emissions. And today we are going to address some issues about climate change and the sector's challenges towards it. Now let me introduce our esteemed panelists who represent both the private and civil society, private sector and civil society. Mr. Uğur Dalbeler has been working in the steel sector for many years. He is the Deputy Chairman of the Turkish Steel Exporters Association and Vice Chair at the World Steel Association. He also served as Chairman of International Rebar Producers and Exporters Association between 2004 and 2014. And since January 2005, he has been the CEO of Çolakoğlu Group, a prominent steel company in Turkey. Hasan Akbulut graduated from Middle East Technical University, Metallurgical and Materials Engineering Department in 1989. He started his professional career as a process engineer at Etibank and worked there from 1989 to 1992, and then worked in various departments at Ereğli Iron and Steel Company from 1992 to 2017. After that, he served as refractory production manager at Kumaş Refractories Company. And from 2019 to 2021, he worked as Executive Vice President, Operations at Karabük Iron and Steel Industry. In 2022, he started working as Technical Affairs Director at the Turkish Steel Producers Association, where he is still currently employed. He has a keen interest in decarbonization activities, actively supporting and participating in the decarbonization efforts of the Turkish steel industry. Mr. Dursun Baş is a researcher and coordinator for Istanbul Policy Center's decarbonization of the Turkish steel sector and promoting the just transition in Turkey projects. IPC is a global policy research institution specializing in key social and political issues, including climate change, He has been an expert in the transposing and implementation of environmental and climate policies in Turkey since 2010. He's a graduate of Middle East Technical University, Biological Science and Environmental Engineering. Mr. Baş also holds a master's degree in Earth System Sciences. He has experience in technical consultancy and project management, and he has contributed to over 20 projects on environmental, nature conservation, and climate themes. Alice Tipping has designed and led highly respected programs of research and policy dialogues on trade and sustainable development issues. Her extensive understanding of the intersection of foreign policy, law, and economics is informed by roles in government and managing policy-relevant research. Previous roles include Program Manager, Environment and Natural Resources for the International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development, Policy Advisor to New Zealand's Permanent Mission to the United Nations, Second Secretary and Legal Advisor to New Zealand's Permanent Mission in the World Trade Organization. Alice has a Master of Philosophy in International Relations from Cambridge University and Bachelor of Laws and Bachelor of Commerce and Administration from Victoria University of Wellington. So, welcome to our panel. So far, thank you for your attention, and let me commence with our session. I would like to start with Mr. Dalbalar. I will extend some questions for him. Mr. Dalbalar, could you please provide us with an overview of world steel production, demand, and market dynamics, and what factors do you anticipate will have the most significant impact on the industry's outlook, global industry's outlook, and what obstacles do developing countries especially encounter during the transition period, and what strategies can they employ to surmount these challenges? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. I'd like to thank at least each of you, because I know the steel is not as attractive as other industries, and the time is rather getting late, but I will just to at least tell you a little about what steel is and how big it is. To start with, steel is a business of about 1.8 billion tons, which is equivalent to $1.8 trillion worldwide. As per the World Steel Association's expectations this year, I think the total steel demand will drop down by approximately 1% to reach about 1.75 billion tons of consumption. So after having 3 years of decline, we expect next year a little rebound of about 1.2 million tons, so that we can achieve about 1.77 billion tons of steel consumption. The main difficulties of this year were especially declining in the household purchasing power, globally. Of course, aggressive monetary tightening, the escalating political uncertainties, especially in the Middle East and Ukraine, and decline in steel demand in China, which represents today about 55% of the total steel business. Can you hear me? I'm having a little bit of an uncomfortable sound, but anyway, I'll carry on. And the key determinants for next year will be, we hope, stabilization of the Chinese real estate sector, effectiveness of the interest rate adjustments, political atmosphere, hopefully, especially in the Middle East, and US trade policies with Trump 2.0, which is uploading currently. And our expectation also for next year, the steel demand to grow about 4% in developing countries excluding China. But the main area of increase will be India, which is still emerging, so expectations that 8% of growth will be experienced. And we also expect developed world to go up by 2%. The challenges of the steel industry worldwide is still the overcapacity. which mainly exist in China. As I said, China produces today almost 1 billion ton out of this 1.8 million tons of production globally. And the second is the protectionism, which is the main issue for the last almost 10 years since Trump's first being in the office. We as the steel industry have been discussing about the overcapacity for the last 25 years, but the main subject of discussion for the last 10 years was the protectionism, because after China is being so powerful as far as steel production is concerned, of course, especially the West, starting with the US and Europe, start taking some restrictions, some measures against their aggressive approach on the steel trade. But the last 5 years, as steel industry, we talk nothing but the clean steel. Because as you know, there's 7% of the total emission being addressed to our industry. So they believe we're one of the most polluting industries in the world. But without having steel in our lives, of course, nothing really can be done. So we have to find a solution to this issue. Almost all the steel companies, just like all the governments, have announced their commitments to become carbon neutral by 2050 and have a progress to reduce along the way. But so far, all the studies and researches are showing that we're at the beginning of a long and challenging journey. So it's not going to be as easy as we thought it would be at the beginning. So we should start with the World Steel key findings about these challenges. Number one, the steel industry will still be increasing its emission for the next maybe 3 or 4 years because the steel production will keep increasing. So we don't expect the emission to be reduced up until 2030. So we haven't yet reached the peak. But then afterwards, we might start seeing some decreases. We estimate a total of 3.7 billion tons of carbon dioxide to be reduced maybe down to 3 billion tons by 2040, meaning today we generate approximately almost 2 tons of carbon dioxide for each ton of steel that we generate, might go down to 1.5 tons. However, we are still much away from the International Agency Energy's net zero emission target because, first of all, the affordable the hydrogen is growing very, very slow. The second, one of the solutions that we believe will be the carbon capture, is also growing quite slowly. And because of what I have just told you about being the tough business, the profitability is already eroded over the last 5 years. So the industry doesn't generate enough cash to fund all these projects. The steel production is expected to reach almost 2 billion tons by 2050. And China, from 1 billion tons, it might go to 800 million tons of production, which will offset the increase in India and Southeast Asia. So as I said, the total emission will remain on the high side for a while. Maybe it will start decreasing after 2040. The main driving factors for the decarbonization are, number one, is the production level, of course. The more you produce, the more carbon dioxide you generate. Number two is technological mix. There are 2 ways of producing steel. One is based on iron ore, and the other one is on the recycling route, which is scrap-based. And there's a huge difference in between 2. So there's an attempt to generate more production on the scrap route, but there's an availability limitation, unfortunately. Number 3 is the metallics mix, which is the raw material to produce steel. So instead of having iron ore directly charged into the blast furnaces, we try to charge more of recycled scrap and the direct reduced iron by reduction of natural gas and hopefully in future the hydrogen. As you know, iron is also found in an oxide form on the earth, which needs to be reduced, and the only reducing agent that has been available so far was carbon. So the world now is trying to replace the carbon with hydrogen, but today we are still far away to reach affordable, low-cost hydrogen. So in the first place, we are trying to reduce the carbon with LNG instead. Number 5 is grid intensity. So the more renewable energy will be available, it will help reducing also the emission. And number 6 is carbon capture, storage, and utilization. So these are the main solutions that the steel industry has been working on it. Of course, the main area of reduction will be China, because, as I just said, their production is going to decrease within the coming years. And for the arc furnace using scrap, today the ratio is somewhere around 30% worldwide, will be reaching up to 40%, and main change will take place in China. It will go up from 10% to 28%. And we expect DRI production, direct reduced iron with the LNG, to reach at least 15% from 10. So that will drop the direct charging or demand more or less like 7%. And we also expect scrap availability. The more we consume, more scrap we generate. So this availability to double by next 10 years, and also reaching almost 40% by 2050. And carbon capture is the most emerging viable technology. However, the progress is still very slow. So I think we need to pay more attention and put more studies on this issue. As I said, the clean hydrogen seems is the main solution for decarbonization. However, it's still very expensive and it's not available in an amount which can solve the problem. But it looks the main issue being discussed around this platform is the funding. According to Wood Mackenzie's report, to achieve net zero emission by 2050, the world needs more or less $78 trillion, which is more or less about $3.5 trillion need to be spent every year. And it seems that's not going to take place. So reaching 1.5 degrees Celsius seems as difficult. Even based on this report, achieving 2.5 degrees, we still need about $55 trillion of spending up until 2050. There are 3 main issues. The energy security, because of the political tensions lately, the tariffs and trade barriers, and the other one is the cost of the investment that I have just mentioned. There are certain attempts in certain places, like US, after the Trump administration, they imposed 25% import duty on steel, which generated hundreds of billions of dollars to the industry so that they could renew all the existing facilities with the new ones. Now, Europe so far have granted over $10 billion of funding to the steel industry to do the same. But so far, this is all being used just to renew their old facilities. So it really wasn't spent on the real issue. And starting from beginning of 26, the CBAM will be in place. So that's going to, I believe, also help European steel industry to move forward on this process. But to my opinion, I believe, based on the current situation, what we need to do is, first of all, we have to increase the efficiency, especially in the steel manufacturing and the processing. So with the less amount of steel, we can do more. And number 2, we need to utilize the existing capacities rather than building the new ones, so that existing funds can be spent to solve the real issue. And the third, as I said, the natural gas to be utilized more in the industry rather than spending so much money and funding on the hydrogen. But lastly, what I would like to suggest, just like we have been discussing about the excess capacity in steel industry, I think we need to start discussing about the excess emission. As I said, there is about 400 million tons of excess capacity that exists, but there are in different geographies, different ways of production with the different emissions. Maybe we can set up a limit and say, okay, about a certain emission, the steel should not be produced. So we can put a ban on the amount of carbon dioxide generated for producing each ton of steel. But that needs a global approach and a global consensus. So that's what I can say as of today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Darbere. Mr. Akbulut, I would like to continue with you. If you don't mind, could you provide us information on Turkey's steel manufacturing capacity and the carbon intensity in steel production? And also, I would like to add a second question. Are there any steel companies striving to achieve net zero emissions in the sector? The floor is yours.
Continue with my presentation. I will there as well. Thank you for your attendance. I want to start with the structure of the steel industry in Turkey. And this is the graphical distribution of steel plants in Turkey. There is 42 crude steel production plants, and 3 of them is integrated iron and steel plant, 28 is electric arc furnace, and 11 induction furnace. Totally 42 plants in all over the Turkey. When we look at the structure of our Turkish steel production, in the world, steel production routes mainly depends on the integrated iron and steel plants that is producing steel from the iron ore, and 29% is the electric arc furnace. When we look at the Turkish steel production, we are almost contrast to the world. Our main route is the electric arc furnace, 71.5%, and 28.5% from the integrated iron and steel works. When we compare the amounts of carbon dioxide produced by the steel production, electric arc furnaces emits around 0.4 to 0.6 tons of carbon dioxide per ton of crude steel. On the other side, the basic oxygen blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace routes produce about 1.8 to 2.4 tons of carbon dioxide, depending on the use of the material, etc. And what is the case in Turkey rank in the world? This is the comparison of the 2023 9 months and 2024 9 months. We are in the 8th rank in all over the world in two years. And the first one is the China. And what is the case for crude steel capacity and production and the capacity utilization? Our capacity reached to 59.3 million tons in 2023, and the maximum amounts we produced in 2021 is 40.4 million tons. Unfortunately, after this, we have some problem with the energy prices increase, also some political conflict in Russia, Ukraine, and the other conflicts. We reduced our production, also the utilization. Nowadays, it decreased to, 55.1 in the 2023. I hope we will increase again to 74.8% capacity utilization in next years. And what are our target in 2053 is 98.8 million tons of production total. Today, as I told before, our capacity is 59.9, and this capacity is coming from the 75% from the electric arc furnace and 25% from the integrated iron and steel works. When we come to the 2053, our electric arc furnace capacity will be 85%, and the 15% will be coming from the integrated iron and steel work. What are we doing for the decarbonization pathway? There are some initiatives and working groups governed by the government side. There are some different working groups. It is related with carbon border adjustment mechanism, technological transformation development, emission trading system, national carbon pricing, and impact of climate change and sustainable development. In all these working groups, we participate, Turkish steel producers and association participate in these works. And this year, at September, our Ministry of Industry and Technology declared our Turkish steel sector's technological transformation pathway. I will not go into the details. We are two different pathways. One is the low carbon pathway scenario and the frontier technology scenario. As you can see, there are use of the best available technicians to the use of the DRI, use of the production of the hydrogen, and use of the hydrogen in the steel industry, also the carbon capture and utilization, and also some biofuels used in the steel industry. Okay, we have a pathway. Unfortunately, we need a lot of finance. And this is the case in some examples. This is in March of 2024. After that, I'm sure there are some declaration of the European steel industry. They're getting some funds from the government. And we just go a few years back and see that in 2021, European steel industry gets about 10.1 billion US dollar from the government. And 2022, they get 226.2 billion US dollar from the government. This includes some high energy because of the energy support provided by the producers. And in 2023, it is 20.4 billion US dollar, and in only just 6 months in 2024, they get 35.6 billion US dollar from the governments. These are we get this information from newspaper. Maybe there are some more, we don't know. As we know, during the years, we have a European Coal and Steel Committee, and in there, they say there will be no single penny to steel industry. They start with this. Unfortunately, we come to a point that they provide funds for the installation of electric arc furnace or installation of complete plant by government, and we cannot compete with this structure if they continue like that. This is the words by I think Belgium ministry. there is a helicopter money poured to the steel industry, and when we come to the our Turkish side, we are still discussing the European Coal and Steel Community rules for subsidies, and there is no single penny coming from the government. Also, there are some burden over Turkish steel industry, like environmental contribution tax or renewable energy tax, and for, to make a transformation, to make our steel green, we need some incentive mechanism to make our steel green, and these government subsidies needs to be reviewed and updated, this taking into account the state aids implemented by EU countries. And what is the case in the Turkish steel industry emission? This is by the European Research Center, 0.88 tons of carbon dioxide per tons of steel we have an emission. On the other hand, European steel industry has 1.2. We are a clean steel, more clean steel than the European or the, just like US. What we need for steel transition and transformation, the establishment of emission trading system should be accelerated, and free allowances need to be provided for energy-intensive sectors. And as steel industry, we confirm that necessary investments must be made to reduce greenhouse gases by providing the necessary support from the funds and budgets by governments, as in the rest of the developed countries. The another issue or the challenges we face with the in steel industry will be waste shipment regulation and scrap restriction. The brown countries already have restriction applied, and the blue one, they are discussing to have restriction. And there is a, as the Green Deal concept is talking, there is a lot of electric arc furnace investment, and for that reason, there are attempts to limit steel scrap exports from European Union, and however, Turkish steel producers anticipate that export measures specifically brought with this revision may cause unjustifiable impediments to the scrap exports. These unfavorable anticipations are also shared by European recycling industries as well. One of the major shared criticism toward this amendment is that it's seen as efforts to provide scrap to European Union steel producers under more favorable conditions, namely easy access to cheaper scrap. And we have banning the European scrap exports is normally not possible, because we have a free trade agreements between European coal and steel community. Also we have a general agreement on tariffs and trade. Normally, Europe cannot ban export to Turkey, but we will see in recent years, coming years, let's say. And also, the same thing is declared by the Bureau of International Recycling on just 13th of October. According to the BIR, free trade needed for global sustainability, an efficient and competitive market. Trade barriers create a competitive disadvantage for recyclers, effect on investment, employment, and innovation, recycling industry representation in decision making. Okay, we believe that European Union has a good goal to first carbon-free or first climate-neutral continent in the world, and we will fully support that. However, European Union should keep in mind that we live as neighbors countries, and cleaning the atmosphere of the Europe will not help to the global problem. The banning of the steel scrap should influence the steel, Turkish steel industry, the decarbonization pathway very much. One other issue is the CBAM. This cannot be used as a non-tariff barrier trade because, as we know, we see that almost all underdeveloped or developing countries are saying their criticism on that, and there are declarations related to it from India, South Africa, South Korea, and this should be maybe this period should be extended in a giving more time on that. And I want to conclude with these words. On 24 of October, European Central Bank chief said, trade restrictions hold back prosperity. Periods of barriers in history have not been periods of prosperity. Strong leadership, says Christine Lagarde. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Akbulut. I would like to continue with Mr. Bash. Mr. Bash, I want to continue discussing the decarbonization of the industry. What's your assessment of the Turkish crude steel industry's current performance in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and what could be the suggestions for 2030? And also, what's the role of energy transition, coal phase out in the decarbonization of the steel industry? Let's hear from you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arman. And I'd like to thank the İMMİB to include us in that panel. Thanks to their kind invitation, I would like to share our ongoing study results on steel decarbonization, current state of affairs regarding the crude steel producers rather than whole sector. And let me introduce my organization. You have already heard that it is international level Policy Research Institute, which is based in Istanbul as a part of Sabancı University. There are 6 different main study areas. Climate policy is one of them. And other than the steel studies, what we do is we are trying to build analytical base for the 2050 decarbonization of Turkish economy reports. You can also find the other decarbonization pathways reports in that website. And I will just try to introduce why we are doing this study and what are the main insights from our site visits and interviews as a scorecard at the end of my presentation. Time to time, I will also touch upon some historical things as well to make it more fancy for the real ongoing political economy behind the steel decarbonization. And this is one of the oldest steel plant in Turkey. It is also based in Istanbul before Turkish Republic times. Okay, let's go on, and you will heard many times Demir, Erdemir, Kardemir, İsdemir, and you will heard Diler Demir Çelik or Asil Çelik. And Demir means iron and Çelik means steel. This is also help us to understand why are the company names are like that. I'm just giving some seconds to check it. And we have very long, common, let's say, language family with the let me check which countries. So the Turkic countries are used the same word for the iron in general. Okay, let's move on the evolution of Turkish steel industry. It will provide why Turkish steel industry has a 2 different division of the crude steel tax. I mean, these are the big guys, thanks to different finance from different countries. The first BF plant has been supported by England. The second one was supported by American finance supports, and the third one, the Soviet money, was there to build our third largest, the first and the third integrated steel plants in Turkey. And as I said, there are 2 main basic divisions before 80s and after 80s, thanks to the state supports in terms of providing export-oriented economy policy chosen by the liberal market times of the 80s. There there became many different EAF plants which are based on scrap. And before that, 80s, there are some big ones as well. Some of them has closed, not shown here, but these are the active ones that works on scrap-based crude steel production in Turkey. As you can see, 80s is the first accelerated phase, and the 2000s are also the second acceleration phase of Turkish steel industry. And thanks to being very close to European markets and the other Middle East and the Middle East country markets, this trade advantage also made this capacity increase and the production increase as well. And what we studied in our recent report, we are just trying to understand what are the main GHG emission sources from BF both plants and the EAF, scrap-based EAF plants. And it is so obvious. The coal is the main source of GHG emissions from integrated steel plants. And for the EAFs, this situation is somehow mixed. If you compare the Italian EAF scrap-based crude steel to Turkish one, you will see that the electricity-based indirect emissions are relatively low, since Turkish grid has very dependent on coal and natural gas. In terms of grid carbon dioxide intensity, there is a kind of competitiveness loss for the EAF plants. When they calculate their total GHG emissions, since they use the grid electricity, the results for their GHG emissions are somehow higher than the Italian or Spanish ones. Even they have good technology, since they use the grid electricity, they became uncompetitive in terms of GHG emissions. And I will not go in depth. I will explain some, let's say, important figures regarding the emissions. But what I would like to say is that it's a very summary. For each 1 ton of crude steel, Turkish steel producers produce 1 ton of GHG emissions as well. And it is somehow very different, since these three big guys are very dependent on coal-based crude steel production. They have the 65% of total GHG emissions in Turkey in 2021, which was the peak year in terms of production. 2021 was the 40 million tons of crude steel. It was all-time record. Nowadays, it's not so well, as Uğur Bey explained regarding the depreciation of the total crude steel production. It is very obvious that first or most important thing for the BF both plants to reduce their coal dependency, either choosing a different reductants, either hydrogen or other alternative technologies. But the situation is not very comparable with the European guys or the Japan guys or the South Korean BF both plants. They have somehow good amount of money to transform their average technological efficiency, material efficiency. But nowadays we are just coming very lightly in terms of increasing the total material efficiency and the technological efficiency with the existing technologies. This is one of the drawbacks for the BF both plants. And regarding the EAFs, yes, when you consider the whole country average, it is okay in terms of weighted average. But if you go further, if you compare EAF in Spain, in Italy and Turkey, it changed in terms of GHG intensity. And the thing is that if you add more capacity in the system, even you have very low GHG intensity, EAFs will be very large in terms of crude steel production, and this figure could be 50% and 50% rather than 65 to 35. That's why it is also a capacity issue. We need to produce less, maybe more quality products, and using less source resources. And at the end of the day, we will be providing more added value for whole country and the society as well. This is one of the missing issue. We are producing in general low value added products. And let's go. These are the results based on our interviews and site visits. You can see these bullet points as a usual suspects, or the narratives of the sector or the sector representatives. There are some new narratives as well, but these are very common for other steel producing countries, common problems. But there are some important one, I would like to focus on that based on our study. The qualified workforce and the cooperation between different steel sector partners are not so strong. When I check the European companies' cooperation and when I check the ongoing Horizon projects for the European steel producers, they had a chance to make a cooperation with universities and the other steel makers. This is not the case for the Turkish steel plants. There are some good examples, but when you compare it, when you consider the whole scale of the Turkish steel industry, it is not very enough. And there are new usual suspects, new narratives. Now we have CBAM, ETS, and carbon price. When you go 3 years ago and check the websites of certain steel makers, you will not see this narrative so much. But after 2020, these ETS things, the carbon price things, became a kind of narrative for the Turkish steel players, even for the governmental players as well. And yeah, we will see at the end of the day whether Turkish government will provide a cap for Turkish crude steel production and provide a cap for the total GHG emissions. But it is very unclear for the sector, for the rest of the society. There are still some preparation studies, but it's not very clear for the sector. Okay, this is very fancy and very interesting for our side. These are the quotations from our interviews. We made interviews with governmental bodies, with the high-level executives and the low-level, I mean in quotation marks, low-level workers, engineers. And what I'd like to stress is that the perception of the sector is somehow, let's say, not positive. They say that we are accounted as forgotten child from state, or when you consider the other prioritized sectors, steel is not the one that included even in the new development plan. There are some big important sectors, but steel is not one of them. And the other thing is that the steel maker says that we are perceived as very wealthy, that's why state doesn't want to help us. This is another thing. And one of the common thing is that in Turkish steel market, the steel maker says that if you don't grow, you will lose. This is also very big narratives based on our interviews. And they say that we are losing our competitive edge. This is very obvious in the interviews, and the figures are also showing that they are losing this competitive edge. And there are some different positions regarding the ongoing decarbonization things. Some of them conservatives, they say that dirt is still invented. What happened? We are just producing crude steel. What in the earth this dirt still has just arrived to Turkey? And some of them is already know that this is a market issue or the competitiveness issue, and they said that the customers started to ask them, what about your carbon footprint? And the other ones, I mean the more progressive one, also started to produce their EPD, Environmental Product Declaration reports. They started to prepare their sustainability report, although it is very late for some of them. The steel sector accepted this game. This is one of the main conclusions from our study. They don't put themselves at the opposite side of the ongoing decarbonization wind. Tabii ki. And let me move on the last slide. This is the one of the main results from our desktop studies plus interviews. The red ones shows the negative progress, and the green ones show positive progress. Yeah, we don't have any progress in the qualified steel or value-added steel in terms of total production, but we have a very bad or very negative progress in terms of capacity increase for EAF-based construction steel things. And although we made a good progress for the flat steel production, we still need the more qualified crude steel production. We need to produce less, but more qualified one. And we use less electricity and the less resources, but we will make the same wealth for the rest of the society. And we don't have any ETS legislation. It is under preparation, but other than ETS legislation, we don't have industrial emission legislation as well. This is also very important in terms of performance of the steel plants, energy efficiency, material efficiency, and we don't have permit system to let us to steel plants which are not very effective. But if you have your environmental impact assessment report, you can also open new EAF plant. But we need to more license-based thing to make it more effective for the resources and for the earning from the sector. Then one final thing regarding the EAFs. For example, in Italy, I think there are some examples for the use of waste heat. We have maybe 24 different EAFs, but we don't have waste heat recovery system for the EAFs, which can also decrease 20-25% of your energy consumption. That's why I can say that we are in a not bad position, but we need to increase our efforts in terms of making all the links to red to green. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bash. Alice, I would like to talk about the policy landscape and the multiplicity border carbon adjustments with you. Could you discuss the policy landscape surrounding BCAs and the key aspects where international cooperation is needed to ensure the effectiveness and fairness of the mechanisms, and particularly for developing countries, of course? And also, how can revenues generated from adjustment mechanisms contribute to the decarbonization of the sector? Thank you.
Thank you. I will pop up here because here is where the clicker is. But let me start perhaps by thanking very much Dr. Vurdu and his team for the invitation to be with you this afternoon. Dr. Vurdu has already very graciously given us his time when we brought together a group of ambassadors to the WTO from 15 different countries to talk about border carbon adjustments. We wanted to bring a real industry perspective, right? And the perspective of somebody who understood leadership and where it was going and could bring to the policy community a sense of what was going on in the real world. And Dr. Vurdu was kind enough to come all the way to Geneva. So my name's Alice Tipping. I lead trade and policy work at the International Institute for Sustainable Development. The IISD is a Canadian think tank, but the trade policy work, given the location of the WTO, is mainly based in Geneva. We've been doing a lot of work on border carbon adjustments in the last few years, and I think it's an extremely relevant topic to bring into a discussion about steel and about heavy industry. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what a border carbon adjustment measure is, in case there's anyone left in the climate community who hasn't already heard of them. I'm going to talk about what we see in the policy landscape on border carbon adjustments. And a spoiler alert, there isn't just one border carbon adjustment to worry about, there's several, and that's a trade policy problem. And then I'm going to talk, as Dr. Vurdu has said, about the developing country perspective and what we could do in the design of border carbon adjustments to make sure that they are not just effective in driving decarbonization, but that they're also fair to trading partners, and that they drive decarbonization not just in the jurisdiction that's imposing them, but ideally for everyone. So, as the smokestacks on this slide suggest, at the moment border carbon adjustments really only apply to a small number of industrial products, right? Those sectors that pay for their carbon emissions domestically, often because there's an emissions trading scheme in place, and for products for which the carbon price paid tends to be economically important. So it's steel, it's aluminium, it's cement, and it's fertilizers. And the reason that governments impose border carbon adjustments for those sectors is essentially to help to ensure that imports of those products into a jurisdiction pay the same amount for the carbon emissions as products produced domestically, right? So they're put in place by countries that are already starting to put more significant prices on carbon to stop the production moving, either because a company closes a factory and opens it somewhere else, or because the competitiveness of the company producing the steel is reduced because they have to pay for their carbon, and is reduced vis-a-vis the imports that come in. This is the thing that people mean when they talk about leakage. So what does this all mean? It means, from a broader economic perspective, that we're not really talking about border carbon adjustments on agricultural products, for example, right? As far as I'm aware, very few countries in the world, perhaps apart from New Zealand, price agricultural emissions because it's so politically difficult. So this, for the moment, is really a heavy industry policy question. It also means that border carbon adjustments probably aren't going to be applied to more complicated manufactured goods, right? Like a car. So once you take steel and aluminium and turn them into a car, most of the value of that car isn't in the raw materials any longer, right? It's in the value that's been added through the design, through the paint, through the fabric that you choose to put on your seats. So the price of emissions in the production of a car isn't really enough to make production patterns change. The leakage risk really applies to products upstream in the value chain. So that's the 5-minute introduction to border carbon adjustments. So where are we, right? So the second point to make, importantly, is that we're not just talking about one border carbon adjustment any longer. There are likely to be several different border carbon adjustment systems in place in the next few years. And to give you a sense of where we are, here is more or less where we are, right? So the EU CBAM has been in force since October. Companies have been required to report their emissions to varying degrees of detail, but payments for those emissions are expected to start in 2026, right, which is essentially only a year away. The UK has also announced that it will be introducing its own border carbon adjustment system in 2027 without a transition period, so 2027 is when we expect to start. Australia has conducted a carbon leakage review, and there are clear signals in the review of interest in establishing a border carbon adjustment. We'll see towards the end of the year whether they really do. And in the United States, everything's all up in the air at the moment, but there have been a number of proposals before the US Congress to establish tariffs or import protections, import prices, some which are linked to emissions domestically and many which are linked to emissions overseas. There are a number of discussions going on that we're aware of in Japan, in Chinese Taipei, and in many other countries about what will happen as carbon prices rise. Right? So from a trade policy perspective, this is a real challenge, right? And there are three parts to this challenge. So the first challenge is what we refer to as the spaghetti bowl, right? If you can imagine a bowl of spaghetti, there are many, many, many different systems and requirements and ways of reporting carbon emissions. And this is a real problem, right? Different border carbon adjustment systems could end up covering different sectors, different greenhouse gases, and even for those that require, if you have two systems, for example, that require reporting of carbon dioxide emissions from steel production, they might require that those reports be produced differently, using different units or in different formats. And essentially all of this means more business time filling out multiple different forms for carbon reporting. And the cost of complying with all this reporting is tough enough if you're a big company. If you're a smaller producer or a producer in a country whose government doesn't have a lot of resources to support you, i.e. a developing country, there's a real inequity in this. The impact could be disproportionate even if the same measure applies theoretically the same to different companies in different places. So there's a spaghetti bowl problem, there's an inequity problem just in the way that border carbon adjustments could end up working, and the last problem is that border carbon adjustments are not one single monolithic thing, right? A colleague of mine refers to them as a decision tree. You can put your cursor, you can design your policy anywhere along the spectrum between pure environmental protection and pure industrial protection. And wealthier countries, we worry, could use border carbon adjustments more to protect their own domestic industries than to protect the environment. So what can we do? The first, and this is a big topic of conversation in Geneva in the trade system, is to try and make border carbon adjustment systems interoperable in some sense, right? To minimize the paperwork businesses have to do and to minimize the confusion that might arise from very different requirements. The second is essentially to do as much as possible to help developing country businesses comply. And that might be making systems more transparent, making policies more transparent so you know what's coming, and providing support to businesses that need it to decarbonize. And here's where a lot of the financing discussion comes in, and we can get to this in the discussion. So a lot of our work has been to help trade ministries in Geneva across a wide range think about these problems and realize that they need to talk to each other about it. But let me come back to one issue, and Dr. Vurdu mentioned this at the beginning. let me come back to the question of support for decarbonisation, because one of the topics that has come up a lot in our discussions with stakeholders and our discussions with companies and governments is this question of what happens to the revenues from a border carbon adjustment system, right? Neither of the border carbon adjustment systems currently in legislation, either in the EU or in the UK, plan to give any of the BCA revenue back. Most of the revenue is planned simply to be allocated to general budgets. Now, we're not talking about huge amounts of money. The EU CBAM might produce at maximum about $2 billion a year, $1 billion here and $1 billion there, and soon you're talking about real money. But the question is, what happens to that revenue, and could it be used to help other countries and other sectors decarbonize, right? And one of the ideas that's come up in a lot of our stakeholder conversations is the idea that revenues could be dedicated not just to be provided back to companies, but to help establish systems for monitoring, reporting, and verifying emissions. And the beauty of this is that it's policy neutral in the sense that every country needs better monitoring, reporting, and verification systems. It doesn't require you to use that MRB to establish an emissions trading system. You can do whatever you like with that information, but everyone will need that information. We think there's a couple of useful facets to this idea, and the first is about policy coherence, right? If you actually return some of the revenues from border carbon adjustments to the companies and the countries that need it, you're helping to accelerate everyone's decarbonisation, not just your own company's decarbonisation. And as we will hear many times this week and next, this is a global problem, right? We might, and I think as somebody else mentioned earlier, the EU can clean up its atmosphere, but at the end of the day, it is a global atmosphere, right? And leadership means bringing everyone along with you. We also think that there's a useful political signalling element here. Many of the concerns that come up around border carbon adjustments, and we saw this in the basic proposal earlier this week about unilateral trade measures, many of the concerns relate to the perceived unfairness of border carbon adjustments and the fear that they will turn into protectionist tools. If the revenues are clearly used, and they don't, you don't have to hypothecate it directly, you can use an aid budget to balance. But if the revenues are clearly used to help everyone decarbonise, it starts to look like a tool that's meant to lift everyone and bring everyone in the same direction. It starts to look like a tool that's really, literally and truly sincerely about environmental protection, not just industrial protection. And we think in the current political climate, that's probably a useful direction to go in. And I will leave it there.
So, esteemed guests, as our panel discussion draws to a close, I want to express my sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for your participation throughout our conversation today. And the exchange of knowledge and ideas here today is very critical as we strive to meet our decarbonization targets and build a more sustainable future. The commitment to innovation, investment, and collaboration will be the key in navigating these emerging challenges. Thank you once again for your participation and commitment to positive change. Let us take the insights gained from today's discussion and turn them into meaningful action to work together towards a resilient and sustainable steel industry. If you have any questions for our speakers, you may address. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentations. My name is Ümit Şahin from Istanbul Policy Center. I have a very short question to our industry representatives. As you know, yesterday, Turkish long-term strategy about climate change is published, it's announced. And there is a very clear target about steel industry in this long-term strategy, which is 20% reduction in 2040 and 99% reduction in 1953. From your perspective, what is your take on this? And especially, what do you think about only 20% until 2040, and then very sharp decrease in 13 years? How do you feel like that in terms of both finance and technology?
As I try to explain, I mean, the commitments is something, but realization is another one. Although Turkish industry has a huge advantage compared to the rest of the world, being 75% depending on the scrap, already our emissions, as Dursun and Hasan Bey have announced, it's quite low. But as you know, there are three scopes. Number one is the process, where we have a huge advantage, but relatively we still have a disadvantage on the scope 2, which is the energy side. But there is a huge progress going on in Turkey, especially on the renewables. Today, the portion of the renewable among the energy mix have already exceeded over 50%, but there is still a huge projects on the pipeline, especially is going to be conducted by the steel industry itself. So I believe that in the next 5 or 6 years that the steel industry is going to be almost not 100%, but close to maybe 90% in net zero on this, the energy side. The only disadvantage we have is the scope 3, that's logistics, because we still need the raw material to be transported from a distance and our material to be shipped again. So that's the only, but overall, I still consider the position of the Turkish steel industry as being in a very, very good compared to the rest of the other people, especially on the Western world. Because if you look at the global trade of steel, which is around 400 million tons, the main sources are China, which today represents 25 to 30%, and then Japan, Korea, they're all on the Far East. Where the main consumption is in the West, which is much closer to Turkey. So I believe we will be having, let's say, a bigger share, maybe a better position, because industry being new, technologically advanced, because it's young, and because of all the advantages. So the government might commit on something, but to realize it, we're looking at a more realistic way.
Thank you. Any other comments? No. Any other questions for our speakers? So, thank you again for everybody. So let's